He tore his scrotum open, to the point a testicle was out. Ask Reddit on Reddit Rundown. What is the most pain you've ever experienced? I got a parasitic infection in my eye from using contacts in the shower, transmitted by my roommate's ferret. The months of light sensitivity sucked, as my eyes were effectively open sores. Even a breeze on my face was rather painful. But then came the surgery and treatment, where they anesthetized my eye and proceeded to scrape at it with a needle while I had to look on in horror and feel my eyeball pushed up against my skull. Then for the next month I had to put literal bleach on my eye every 3 hours to sterilize it. Imagine setting an alarm, putting bleach in your eyes, trying to fall asleep amid the burning, finally falling back asleep just before the alarm goes off again for another drop. That definitely broke me. Don't fuck around with contacts, kids. I was getting in my car with my dog and my breakfast. I must have gotten in at a weird angle because my knee slipped out of place and I went crashing to the ground in pain. As I got my bearings and tried to fix my leg, my dog just looked at me and ate my breakfast burritos. Got my foot cut off, but that wasn't the worst pain. When they removed the dressing from where they took the skin graft from my leg to replace the skin on my foot, it felt like they were peeling my skin off. Edit, guys, I really appreciate the thought, but do not give me gold for this. It was like ripping off a big, super stuck band-aid. Yes, it was the worst pain I've ever experienced, but I was okay after an hour or two and then it was just itchy. Did you see the dude who caught some shit from his roommate's ferret? He had to put bleach in his eyes for months, give it to him. Got my testes twisted and was in absolute agony for 3 hours before I got surgery. I had ovarian torsion, but my teachers and parents didn't really listen to me, so it developed into gangrene. Eventually managed to push doctors about how much pain I was in. They decided to remove my appendix just in case and so they could do exploratory surgery, and found necrosis the size of half a football in my abdomen. I had a student stab me once. 16 stitches across my right ribs. It sucked, a lot, but when I got to the hospital and they started stitching it up, the adrenaline had worn off and the local anesthetic they gave me was not working. The doctor, who I'm pretty sure studied medicine under Dr. Mengele, was not gentle or polite about it. Feeling him pierce my skin as he stitched me up made me throw up and black out. I know it's not very appropriate, but can we know why he did that? And what happened afterwards? Oh, for sure. So, I taught in a really bad part of Detroit. I had this kid in my first period class who had literally been to school like 6 times all year. He was also an 18-year-old in grade 9. A week before the end of the year, he shows up and demands all of his missing and makeup work. I tell him that it's a lot and he probably won't be able to get it done. He doesn't care. I don't want the fight, so I literally print out everything I had given out that year. I tell him to go get it from the copier and to come back. He dips and never comes back. The next week is exams. Monday is a strict review day. He shows up with 3 sheets of paper with some scribbling on them, shoves them in my face and demands an A. I tell him he didn't follow my instructions and didn't have enough done to justify passing, let alone an A. He screams, shoves me, and pulls a knife. He legit tried to plunge in my chest, but I was able to kind of deflect it so he only slashed my ribs. I pushed him back, and 3 of my other students hopped on top of him and beat him unconscious until security showed. Cops came, arrested him, and I went to the hospital in an ambulance. As they were stitching me up, they wheeled him in. He was in the ICU for like 2 weeks. Spent most of it in a coma from the beating he took. Somehow, the 3 kids that beat him all got 100% on their final exams and A's in the class. After I got stitched up, I went back to school. I got there roughly period 5. From then on, I was known as the school badass and literally never had an issue in my classroom again. The kid has another 2 years on his sentence, BTW. Oh, and the school paid for me to get cosmetic surgery to hide the scar. School paid. Had an ovarian cyst that burst. First it felt like normal period pain. Fast forward an hour later, I am throwing up in the bathroom and crying. Of course, I had no painkillers in the house and it was around 6 a.m. so no store was open. The only thing I could think of doing was drive to work because I knew there was medical kit with painkillers. So, I drove there in complete agony, very safe. I took few painkillers and went to lie on the conference room floor. Nice surprise to my colleagues when they arrived. After that episode I got endometriosis diagnosis. Appendix rupturing. Thought I was just having a stomach ache, waited in bed for hours, got so bad I couldn't walk. Ambulance came and had to wheel me out in the fetal position. Emergency surgery, almost died, hospitalized for 2.5 weeks. It was ugly. Right there with you, brother. My appendix went bad when I was 15 and after a few days I was taken to the doctor. She was incompetent and immediately decided I just had bad gas and sent me back home. Couple days later I'm in ever increasing pain and I go back to see a different doctor. He sends me to the ER immediately and I'm in surgery that night. When I woke up, the surgeon was there and he told me I was already developing gangrene and if I would have put off surgery for even one more day, I would be dead as a doornail. Unrelated, the first doc that almost got me killed ended up murdered in a ditch outside of my town a couple years later. When I was in 3rd grade, I broke my arm jumping off a swing. It was Labor Day weekend, so I guess all the good doctors at the hospital were on vacation, and the resident who was treating me set my arm wrong. They didn't notice until I went back for follow-up x-rays a couple weeks later, to check how I was healing. My bones had already partially healed, but the angle was wrong, so what they did was saw open a bit of my cast and insert a wedge device, and crank it until my forearm was straight. They needed to bend it a good 30 degrees. I didn't get any sort of painkiller. Hurt like fuck. In a convo with someone who was stung by a box jellyfish, they said if they'd had a gun they would have shot themselves, no question. The guy was a university/college professor, really genuine individual, which made what he said all the more real. Box jellyfish are the most venomous creatures on Earth. Yay, Australia. When I was 12, I was hit by a car at 45 miles per hour. The impact snapped my left humerus and shattered my left tibia/fibula. I was thrown 20 feet into a busy intersection. In the ER, the attending decided to lift my broken leg without support in order to get a board under it. Everyone told him not to, from the EMTs to the trauma nurse to my mother, who had been an RN for years. He did it anyway. The pain sent me into a grand mal seizure, every muscle in my body contracted, including my left tricep, deltoid, and trapezius, which caused the jagged edge of my broken arm to slip its setting and move toward my neck. I never once lost consciousness. Edit, since people are asking, and in some cases challenging my story, I was, of course, in severe shock for the entire experience and have only a spotty memory of most of it. This was 30 years ago, after all. But my mother, an RN who at the time had trauma and ER experience, has always been adamant about the fact that I maintained consciousness throughout the whole episode. I've always taken her word for it. Everyone saw the doctor lift my leg. As soon as I started seizing, the EMTs, the nurses, and my mother all moved to restrain me as much as possible to minimize further injury. My mother was the first to see my humerus fracture slip its setting. I don't know if anyone told the doctor off after the fact, but I learned some time later that he was the doctor in charge of my PT and outpatient recovery. Last I knew, years after the fact, he had become a board member for that hospital. My parents did not sue the driver. The street was a 3-lane, and I wasn't crossing at the intersection. The driver that hit me was illegally using the middle turn lane to pass another car, which is why he was going so fast in a 35. The police report only made mention of the fact that I was not at the crosswalk, but said nothing of the driver's illegal maneuver or negligence. I actually kind of feel like we'd have had a solid court case, but my parents never took action, which I now know to be typical of them, but at 12 I had no idea. When I was 11 my front tooth got knocked out in one piece. I find the tooth and run home. It was a holiday so the dentist said to save time clean it up in milk and put it back in and he will stabilize it once we get to his clinic. So, my mom has to out the tooth back in the gaping fresh wound. I was crying and my mom was like, oh shut up, it not that bad, I lost it again like 27 years later. Lol. I once had an infection inside my wisdom tooth, that was the worst pain I've experienced. Painkillers didn't touch it, and just breathing was agony. I spent 2 days awake before I could get it removed. I know a lot of people have said kidney stones, but I got added agony. I was on the floor writhing from the pain and I had to vomit. The pain of a stone felt like someone actively had their hand inside me and were ripping around inside. I couldn't control my body enough to sit up to vomit, but I got to my side at least so I wouldn't choke on the vomit. I heaved and the pressure made my vision technicolor with pain. That's when I popped a disc in my back from an old rowing injury. I momentarily marveled that I could even register this new agony. Just like the first time, white, hot fire ran up my spine and I couldn't breathe anymore. I remember begging for death in my head. I couldn't scream as vomit was now shooting out of my nose because my jaw had clenched shut. I started basically drowning and my whole body was vibrating. Eventually I passed out. When I came to, I started to sobbing because I was still alive. Not from relief, I was so utterly disgusted that I was alive. That's when my roommate found me. I still get flashbacks of how badly I wanted to die. I know for a fact if I had had a knife, I wouldn't have hesitated to plunge it straight into my neck. It is a terrifying memory. I had to get a physical for the Navy. They found minute amounts of blood in my urine. You couldn't see it when I peed, only using their testing process. They had to figure out what was wrong with my bladder. First was an ultrasound of my full bladder. Annoying, but not painful. Then, apparently, the prostate can cause that type of issue. Got a finger up the butt. Again, uncomfortable, but not really painful. The last thing was to shove a camera up my urethra. They gave me Vicodin and Valium, the same thing that gave me for my vasectomy. Nothing else pain-wise was given. As soon as they shoved the camera up my dick, I sobered up and felt the most intense pain ever. They proceeded to wiggle it around in my bladder and trip my bladder as full switch. Got done and tried to pee. Visible blood this time and I felt violated for the rest of the day. Found the same blood about 4 years later. Made them knock me out because I wasn't doing that awake again. Nothing conclusive was found. Doc said that some people have microscopic amounts of blood in their urine. I happened to be one of the unlucky ones. A drunk girl decided to start cooking during a house party at my place while I was in university. She filled a pan with oil, turned it on max, then went outside to have a smoke. I was not in the kitchen. Few minutes later, the smoke alarm goes off as the oil had started to burn. I didn't realize how full it was, and when I grabbed the handle, the boiling oil spilled back onto my hand and I got severe burns all over it. The pain just kept getting progressively worse for hours and hours. Ended up getting a skin graft. IUD insertion. It was brief, but the worst pain I ever experienced. The nurses said I handled it well, then I proceeded to throw up at a stoplight while driving home. Apparently, some women only feel mild discomfort during the process. For everyone that's gotten/is getting an IUD, doctors can do a local anesthetic so you feel nothing. My doc told me that apparently all DRS know this, but some are just lazy or don't take women's pain seriously. You do not need to go through pain to get an IUD. This pisses me off so much because I tried to get an IUD 4 years ago and my cervix wouldn't open enough to do it. The doctor wrenched for like 30 minutes trying to do it while I cried and tried to stay still. Eventually he was just like, I guess we can't do it. He tore my cervix, and that's why he decided to stop. I ended up getting my tubes tied a year later because I can't take hormonal birth control and I thought I just couldn't get an IUD. I once had to re-inflate my own lung after a 500cc pleural effusion was drained from one side. Every breath was agony. I had to keep taking deep breaths over several hours to fully expand my lung to full size. DRS gave me Dilaudid every 2 hours that didn't even touch the pain. Only time I've ever gotten close to hitting a 10/10 pain. Dehydration. I was in college and I got mono terribly. I had a high fever and my throat was mostly closed and I couldn't swallow at all. Eventually everything just felt like a dull pain, until I'd move and it would become a very sharp pain. I remember somehow getting to the campus medical ward, and the nurse telling me I was at a 10 pain level. In any case 2 IVs later and I was feeling a lot better. Later on, I broke 2 vertebrae in a car crash and the dehydration was considerably worse. Doctor treating my ingrown toenail without numbing it. Okay, let me share a horror story on this one. I used to have ingrown toenails all the time. At one point I was upset about one and didn't really get it treated in time. It developed a massive infection on top of the nail and I had to get treated in the hospital for like the 3rd time. At this point both my big toes had an ingrown nail once. I don't know if you guys have had it treated in a hospital, but they give you 2 injections at the base of your toe. But both of the injections first inject at the top and then the needle gets pushed deeper for another injection deeper in the toe. This in itself is horrible and was the reason I let the third infection get out of hand, my stupid mind thinking that it would heal itself or something. So, the third time in the hospital the toe didn't get numbed by the 2 painful injections, so they had to do a third injection straight into the infected area. I have never ever felt pain like that in my life, and I wouldn't wish that kind of torture on my worst enemy. Moral of the story: for the love of God, trim your toenails carefully. Tore an abdominal muscle once because I had a respiratory infection and wouldn't stop coughing. Because it was a core muscle, I could do almost nothing without experiencing excruciating pain. Abdominal muscles and back muscles are the worst because everything you do requires the use of them in one way or another. Got to stand up? Stand still? Take a shit? Lift your leg? Sit down? Yeah, good fucking luck. I threw my back out about, oh geez, has to be at least 6 years now. Worst pain of my life, and I had a rough pregnancy/delivery. I was completely seized and had to go to the hospital 4 separate times over the next 6 months to have muscle relaxers administered because I could not straighten my back. So, I get this abdominal pain thing you mentioned because damn. They are just 2 sides of the same coin. 10/10 do not recommend. This didn't happen to me, but it's worth a mention. My little brother's best friend was playing on an old metal swing in our back garden. He climbed up the swing and decided to slide down the metal pole. Unfortunately, an old rusty screw was sticking out. He tore his scrotum open, to the point a testicle was out. Horrible. He didn't tell anyone, went home and fainted into his mom's arms. This kid was so accident prone, but this beats all of his accidents. Anyway, he had his bag stitched closed and healed well. Got bit by a brown recluse when I was 8, which caused a staph infection on my back. I had it for a week before noticing it, and when I got to the doctor they told me that if it wasn't for the infection digging into my muscle I'd be dead already. He then told me I was in for some serious pain and told me to bite down on this leather strip. He had to push everything out of it and cauterize it. I have never experienced pain like that since. And I've broken quite a few of bones, one of which came out of my skin. It was nothing compared to this. I passed out 3 separate times from the pain, and the police were called by the neighboring business because they heard a child being brutally tortured. And this was with morphine and local anesthetic. My mom was crying her eyes out because she felt so bad about what was happening, and the doctor told me it was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. The newest Harry Potter book had just come out, and was expensive, but my mom bought it for me and cooked my favorite meal of 3 days in a row. I'm not gonna lie, I was fucking bawling when I had to go back for the checkup on it because the doctor warned me that he might have to do it again if the infection returned. Which it didn't. The doctor gave me the $50 my mom had paid for the appointment and said that he couldn't accept money for what he did to me, still charged my insurance though. Which I gave to my mom for the book. I usually had to work for the money for the Harry Potter books. Which my mom used to take our family out to dinner as a celebration for the infection not returning. Thanks for listening to Reddit Rundown. Give a thumbs up and subscribe, and help me get to 1,000 subs. Leave a comment below on what kind of topics or stories you would like to hear. You can also check out other videos on my channel. Thanks and have an awesome day.